Okay, welcome to the podcast. I have special guest today, Mr. Eric Granof. Mr. Granof is Vice President of Communications at AIA, which is the nation's largest surety slash insurance company that specializes in bail bonds. So, welcome to the podcast. How's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Cool, right on. So this podcast is going to be specifically about risk assessment tools and artificial intelligence or algorithms, their use in risk assessment tools. So first things first, what is a risk assessment tool?
Well, a risk assessment tool is something that's been used, I think, in a lot of different industries around the world and everything. They've been using them for a while in criminal justice, mostly, I think, in the kind of parole area, where they take a look at a defendant or they took a look at an inmate to determine, based on their history, based on their current status and how they've done, and how they'll re-assimilate back into society. And so they do these studies on lots of them, and then they basically use those studies to determine whether someone should be released early or not. But more recently, they're trying to use these risk assessments in the pretrial detention area, where they take a look at a defendant to, based on what other defendants have done, determine whether this person is going to reoffend and not show up for court. So it's just a way to kind of, for lack of a better way of saying it, in a way, predict the future on how someone's going to behave.
And of course, artificial intelligence is a huge buzzword moving forward, AI, and they've been sort of integrated into the risk assessment tool. So what are some of the pros and the cons of what we know about risk assessment tools and algorithms right now?
Well, I think what we're finding is that, I think if you utilize these things, and like I said, they use them across a wide range of industries, and I know insurance uses them, more general types of insurance, but I think that the benefits is it allows you to crunch a lot of data to look for trends. And that's pretty much what these algorithms do. They look for trends in the data so that then you can utilize these trends to help you make some decisions. Now, the shortcomings in them is that, they're only as good as the information that you put into them to be able to come up with those trends. And a big criticism of these things in the criminal justice system is that they're based on historical data that some people believe is, filled with racial bias and other types of biases, so that if you're putting racial bias into an algorithm, your end result is going to give you a trend that includes that racial bias. And that's kind of where the big criticism about these risk assessments has shown up. And then we're also seeing the results not being what they've really, kind of touted them as, is that a lot of these studies that have been done show that, using a risk assessment versus a judge making a decision, that the quality of that decision is really no better than a coin flip. So is a risk assessment really helping you when you're basically have a 50-50 chance in getting the answer right? That really becomes the big question.
Yeah, totally. And we were talking about this years ago, and you had brought up a study done by ProPublica where they took similar defendants, similar risk factors, however, one was black, one was white, and oddly enough, the one who was rated as more likely to return to court, there is a higher failure to appear rate for the white person who was supposed to appear in court, and then the black person who had either a similar risk score rating or was given a worse risk score rating, totally went to court and didn't reoffend. So what were some of the takeaways from that ProPublica report that came out a few years ago on algorithms in risk assessment tools?
Well, I think the ProPublica study, I think it's important, is because I think it is the first one to really shine a light on these algorithms. And, for the last probably 5 to 6 years, there's really been this movement within the criminal justice system that this whole idea of, evidence-based pretrial solutions using these algorithms is, the be-all, end-all to solving all the ills in the criminal justice system. And what ProPublica said was, look, we before algorithms, we approach this as that there's problems in the system, is that there's racial bias amongst, whether it's law enforcement officers, whether it's the judges, whether it's whatever the reason is, and so these things were supposed to remove that or smooth out that racial bias. And unfortunately, what they found in that study was that it actually accentuated them. And a lot of them being around these false positives, which you kind of referred to, is that thinking someone was going to necessarily be dangerous and then having them not be dangerous. So, and then I think it tell you, well, who did we say was not dangerous that ended up being dangerous? So it really opened up, I think, a can of worms and shined the light behind the curtain of really what goes on with these, and got people a lot of interested in doing more studies and digging a little deeper.
Yeah, it was really eye-opening because I personally had done a lot of reading, and of course we're in the business of assessing risk. So me and you, we geek out on the best ways to assess risk. I had recently read a book called The Man Who Solved the Market. It's on Jim Simons, the innovator who created quant trading, which is basically using data points and algorithms to game the stock market. And he's far more successful than any other trader, like Warren Buffett, Ray Dalio, all of them. He smashes their numbers. And I was thinking to myself, man, if you could somehow game the stock market, how could you not be able to predict somebody's appearance in court? So I guess the true question, or what I'm really getting to, is, do you think it's possible to use algorithms to predict somebody's future attendance in court?
It's a great question, because, my belief on that, and once, I'm a communications guy. I'm not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination, but I've had this conversation with an individual who is a, very big statistician, very big into algorithms, very big into kind of the science of decision making and things like that. And I remember telling him once that, that I personally didn't believe that a computer could literally predict human behavior, because I think that humans can't predict their own behavior. I mean, if you think about it in the context of our world, you don't go to the bar that night to get into a fight. You get into a fight because some circumstance happens which makes you do something stupid or react to something that happens. So there's, can you predict that behavior? I don't know if you can. And this scientist that I was having dinner with tonight, and he seems to think that you can. When you look at enough data points and enough of people being in those situations, you can predict how people will behave in those situations. So I think that the question's always out there. I think anytime you try to replace human thought with computers, I think some places it works better than others. But criminal justice, to me, is it's a sticky wicket, I guess, is the way to put it, because you're dealing with emotions, you're dealing with behavior, you're dealing with, when we look at risk, we look at data points that are very different than the data points that a computer does. We're talking to family members. We can tell when family members trust a family member or they don't trust a family member, or we have those interactions, and we know those safety nets and those circles of influence that those people have around them, and whether it makes sense to let someone out or not. Whereas a computer just looks at, did this guy commit a crime before? Was it a dangerous crime? Does he they look at more black and white data points. And I think where bail agents do, and what we're really good at, is that we look at, we're in the gray area. And I think it really gives us maybe a fine tuning to our decision making than just relying on a black and white computer program.
Yeah, there's the science, and then there's the art. And in some contexts, you get demonized for relying on the more art part of it. We meet with people, we get a vibe for somebody's likelihood to go to court. We could look at their history. We could do what's called underwriting, which is a fancy insurance term for just reviewing the risk factors. There is definitely a science and an art to it. And just in general, I was watching a podcast with Gary Vaynerchuk, and he was talking about things that you can't necessarily quantify. And one of them was like, try to quantify your love for your mother. Like, could you put that into a mathematical equation and show somebody how much you love your own mom? You know what I mean? It's like, it's not as easy to just put things into the box of science, right? And then be able to extrapolate information from that. And plus, I think we have examples, jurisdictions who have relied on risk assessment tools and have had mixed results. So I believe Kentucky is one jurisdiction that relies on these risk assessment tools, if I'm correct. What would that, like, what happened in the jurisdictions where they do rely on these risk assessment tools?
You know, I'm still waiting to see a report where these risk assessment tools actually do show the promise of what they've made. I mean, it's, you know, Kentucky, the results aren't showing promise. They're showing that, you know, there are still the racial disparities, which is what these things were designed to eliminate. They're finding that people are still sitting in jail, and it's just, these things make a lot of promises, and they just haven't delivered. And I think, you know, the criminal justice system seems in the 16 years that I've been involved with AIA, you know, they're attracted to the shiny new tool. And to me, risk assessments is the shiny new tool. And it's not that bail has failed. I mean, I think that bail does exactly what it's supposed to be. It's that balance point in the criminal justice system that ensures people show up, yet at the same time allows them to get out so they're not detained. We're that fulcrum that keeps the balance. But they're always looking for that new thing to do it better and replace us somehow. And we've withstood so many of these types of things, and this just seems to be the latest one they've thrown at us. And, you know, I love the example, and I know I give presentations on this all the time, but, you know, after that ProPublica story came out, the other big thing to me was a TED Talk that Ann Milgram gave, who used to work at the Arnold Foundation, who has their own algorithm, which is proprietary, and really no one knows what's in it. That's another question about these things, is what's really in them. But she gave this TED Talk, and it became very famous, and it was all about moneyballing the criminal justice system, is what it was called, and it's based on that movie Moneyball, about the Oakland Athletics and the process that they undertook to manage their team by using data, and how successful it was, and their ability. And it's funny because I always look back on that, and I don't know if you were present at the last presentation I gave, but the last thing I remember is I don't remember the last World Series that the Oakland A's won using their Moneyball system. So how effective are algorithms in predicting, whether someone can hit a curveball, on a 3-2 count better than someone else, or whether someone shows up for court or not? I mean, I think there's a lot of questions about it. I don't think it's been proven yet, and I still think it's the shiny new tool that they're trying to replace us with.
Yeah, and I am suspicious, and I hope everybody listening to this is suspicious of, it's like when you ask a barber if you need a haircut, surprise, surprise, the answer is always, yeah, let's go ahead and line you up, or, oh yeah, let's go ahead and trim this, blah, blah, blah. Here in Hawaii, there's a lot of money in real estate, and if you ask a realtor, and I have several friends that are realtors, if now's a good time to buy, oh, surprise, surprise, yeah, it's a great time to buy. Oh, it's a good time to sell? Yeah, great time to sell right now. You should go ahead and get after it. When somebody stands to gain from a transaction, there's a conflict of interest that for some reason certain industries they just skate on. If the Arnold Foundation says, hey, these are our numbers, this is how this tool works, it's proprietary, so we're not going to tell you how we really do it, but hey, trust us, we're going to go ahead and lease this out to you, or maybe we'll give it to you for free for some sort of inroad somewhere else. I don't see how the alarms don't go off and people don't think, wait a minute, maybe we should insist that they do a regression first and show us over the last 5 years of what's already happened if this actually works. But for whatever reason, the algorithm crowd get a complete pass and they never have to do that. Why do you think that we just overlook evidence like that?
It's not even about getting, having them do an analysis like that. It's just show us the real data. I mean, we're looking at bail reform that's happened in New Jersey that we still don't have any statistics for. No one's told us failure to appear rates. No one's told us any of the information, yet they talk about what a success it is. And we all know from word on the street is that crime is up. People aren't showing up for court. It's complete and utter chaos. Yet all you hear is the rosy review of how well bail reform is working there. So I don't think it's a matter of them doing the analysis. It's just sharing the data and giving us the real data, and stop trying to sugarcoat or hide, the results of this stuff. Because if it's not working, we should all know. Because we all have a vested interest in making sure our criminal justice system works. I mean, if you're a bail agent or a scientist, you go to sleep at night and you don't want to get broken into or robbed or have someone in your family hurt because someone was let out that shouldn't have gotten let out. I mean, it's public safety for everyone, not just for people that have special interest in something over someone else. And and I think that's an interesting point that you did make, is that I think as human beings, and you use the tool you have and the tool right? So if you go and talk to someone in the military about how do you solve the problem in the Middle East, it's going to, we need a military solution. Or if you go and talk to a scientist, they're going to say, we got to use scientific algorithms to turn how to figure that out. Or you talk to a doctor and it's like, we need to cure everyone. So people use the tools they have. So I think you talk to a data scientist and ask them how you solve the criminal justice problem, they're going to tell you need to use computers and algorithms. And then if you tell a bail agent, hey, how are you going to solve the problem? They're going to use their tool, which is, let us do what we do. And I think what people need to realize is that it's not just about one tool or the other. I think it's a combination of these things. Now, if there's benefits in the use of algorithms to provide data and information for judges to do their job and do it better, then I'm all for that. But if it involves eliminating one component that does work, like the bail system, then that's not an honest use of information or an honest use of a solution. That's just using something to get rid of something else. If we really want to make it better, I think we need to understand how all these things can work together and to leverage the positives and the benefits they bring.
Yeah, totally. It's an ecosystem, and it should be looked at as bail is just one tool. Pretrial services is another tool for the indigent. Cash bail, if it's effective, which it's been shown to, can be a tool where you can just circumvent everything and just go ahead and post cash, and you're incentivized to go back to court because you want your cash back. That's another tool in the toolbox. But let's get back to the ecosystem. And you said something quickly at the convention that I wanted to ask you about, and I'm going to kind of surprise you with. You talked about budgeting being directed directly to rehabilitation programs. And it was just a quick sentence. You're like, we need to spend more money and invest more in rehabilitation programs as opposed to doubling down and expanding the budgets for parole or probation offices. What I sort of inferred from that was, man, that's really smart. Is there a way where we could just directly fund the solution, which is different techniques or different programs to help people who have mental health issues, maybe substance abuse issues, anger management issues, whatever it is? Did I just make that up, or what did you mean when you talked about using funding that traditionally went to like probation offices to rehabilitation programs?
Well, first off, I probably didn't say one thing fast. I probably say everything fast. That's how I talk. But no, I think I was talking in regards to, I think, a letter that was written by some of these advocacy groups that were against the use of these algorithms. And a lot of the solutions in terms of some of these bail reform solutions have been to, eliminate money bail and then just to release as many people possible and to dump that money into probation and parole to oversee the release of these people, which if you think about it, let's get rid of the private sector that does this job, but really at no cost to the taxpayer. Let's put a cost on the taxpayer to put that into probation and parole and have them manage pretrial defendants. Yet the problem of the supervision really, that was being done already. But what we're missing and what you're missing and where money is not going is into when you people are committing crimes. You just releasing them isn't going to help them. It's getting them the help they need, whether it is mental health, whether it's alcohol, whether it's drug. What type of counseling and what kind of help can we get these people? Pour money into those programs, and I think you'd have bail agents on board with you all day long. In fact, I know many bail agents that have actually started their own programs that when they bail someone out, they help them find the treatment that they need. And I think that, there's, like I said before, it's like you mentioned that, that ecosystem is that we all have to find a way to work together, and there's too much effort being put into how do we eliminate one component over the other. I can even take it a step further to say that I wouldn't even just put money on the back end. I think we need to take a look at putting money on the front end. It's like we're trying to solve a problem. There's too many people in jail, and the solution that we're coming up with let's have an algorithm that allows us to release as many people from jail that we can in a safe manner. And I would say that that's almost a ridiculous thing to talk about. If I'm a person living in the community, the last thing I ever want to hear anyone talk about is how do we release more people out of jail? To me, I want to hear how do we prevent more people from going to jail? So let's invest in schools. Let's invest in family counseling and teaching our people in all types of communities how important the family unit is and how important fathers are and how important parents are to making sure that their kids go to school and to give the right value. I mean, there's so many things that we could be doing as a community to prevent that jail cycle from ever starting, and no attention is ever put on that. It's always on the back end. And to me, I'd like to see really a comprehensive solution with more investment on those rehabilitation programs, as well as a front end approach to really, approach the entire ecosystem, not just one half of it.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think at the bail convention, Tommy Lauren sort of said something like that too, where the family unit has failed, the school system has failed. We're sort of like the last line of rehabilitation in a weird, perverse way, where now that somebody has been accused of doing something wrong, now the cops have to go clean up everybody's mess and separate them from the public, or the bondsman has to go ahead and participate in, getting the person out and guaranteeing that they go back to court. When if you just thought about it like how you said, maybe that ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Reinvestment in rehabilitation, as well as, on the front end, counseling for families, you know what I mean? Better schools, education, that all makes a lot of sense. What's the latest? And we're shooting this, we're recording this during, right now it is April 23rd. We're in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis. What's the latest going on with emergency releases and bail in general in California?
Well, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, the Judicial Council and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in California passed an order creating a statewide bail schedule, basically saying that all misdemeanors and most low-level felonies would just basically, the schedule would release people on a $0 bond. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not sure how legal that is or how constitutional it is, but because there's been an emergency declaration in California, I think they can do whatever they want at that point. But, I just think that, like I said before, to think that the releasing defendants from jail as a solution to anything, to me, doesn't make any sense. And I think that there's ways to protect those in custody, at the same time protecting those who are out of custody. And what we're seeing is they're releasing these people and they're immediately reoffending right now. Because what people don't understand is there's a situation going on in California jails where everyone who is low-level misdemeanors, who has doesn't have a long history of crime, who has first-time offenders, all those people aren't in jail. Those people haven't been in jail in many years. California has reorganized its jail system where it took, it was court ordered that its prisons had to reduce populations. So those people were moved into county jail systems, which basically meant that people in the county jail system had to be moved out so that only people that were really more dangerous high-level felonies were actually going to be housed in jails now because there's not a room for anybody else. And now the problem is all these people have been let out, so now our jails still have people in them, and the people that you're releasing aren't low-level people because they're not in jail anymore. So you end up releasing people who are a little more violent, a little more hardcore, and repeat offenders, and you're seeing the results of it. I mean, within hours of being released, these people are going out and reoffending. And I think it's not just California. You're seeing that in New York. You're seeing that in every state where they're letting these people out. Within hours, you have people committing more crimes. And that just can't be a solution that helps our communities and keeps them safe.
Wow, that's eye-opening. During the time of the bail bond convention, it was February, New York was already at the point where the public sentiment had turned against the reforms. We learned about all the underhanded ways that the reforms were actually passed in the first place. And then we saw the early numbers where there were like double-digit increases in just about every meaningful statistical criminal justice statistic. So just last week, they modified the system so that there are certain conditions where judges are given the ability to assign cash bail in certain cases in New York. What's been like sort of like the reaction, you're in California, what's been sort of like the reaction among bail agents to New York literally 4 months into getting rid of cash, now reinstituting cash in certain situations?
Well, I mean, I think there's a sense of relief. I mean, I think, when this happened, everyone knew it was going to be a complete and utter failure, and it was going to be a dangerous failure. And that's exactly what happened. And I mean, you think about it, a market the size of New York, to turn their bail reform effort around within 4 months is pretty astonishing. To show you the magnitude of the failure that it is. They learned very quickly you can't release people without accountability. These people aren't showing up. They're going out and committing more crimes. And they realize that they need to give judges discretion and let judges make that determination. Because at the end of the day, that's what they do. And that's what they're good at. And I think there's a sense of relief. I think it's still too early for agents to really kind of see the uptick in business, but I think it's going to be there because I think people were fed up with the crime. And for the fact that it happened in a major media market like New York, I think is good for the rest of the country to see their failure so that they don't repeat it.
Well, yeah. And I've always been a big proponent. We're in Hawaii. We're usually like several years behind the movements on the mainland. I think we're in the perfect position, not to be too selfish, but this is where I'm at. I'm here in Hawaii. We could look at different jurisdictions like New York, Kentucky, the DC system. We have the luxury of being able to watch California, which has the referendum coming up in November, to see if you guys actually have cash bail or don't have it. We could learn from you guys on the mainland because there's so many jurisdictions where if people say like one of the mass incarceration myths, money is the reason why people are in custody and there's mass incarceration and there's overcrowding. Well, there's lots of jurisdictions that don't have cash and they don't use money in their bail system and they still have the overcrowding. How do you explain that? It's like the perfect example that I could go ahead and point to. So I'm always stoked when you guys like help educate us here in Hawaii on the mainland.
And the one thing, just to jump around to interrupt you, but the one thing people seem to not remember is that if there's someone in jail that doesn't have any money and they're indigent, a judge can already release that person on a $0 bond or on their own recognizance without anyone having to pass any legislation, without any activists having to, go influence a legislator in some way. The system already handles that. And if the issue is that you think there's poor people in jail, find out why they're not being released, as opposed to just assuming because it's money. And I think that's the thing that false narrative that's being spun, that it's all about the money, has left out, is that the system already has the mechanisms in place to handle those. And we need to just have the information of why that's not happening. And by the way, it's typically because that person's a repeat offender with a long list of crimes that the judge has seen 5 times in the last month, and they don't want to release because they know the person is not going to stop committing crime are not going to come to court. So there's a lot of information that's available to us and a lot of things that we can do already to make the system work better that that people just need to take a step back and understand.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you very much for participating in the podcast. I really appreciate you spending time to go ahead and do this focus on algorithms and the latest in California. Maybe after when all this passes, I could have you on the podcast again for an update.
No, I'd love to, but I'd love to be out there in person doing it instead of over the phone.
There you go. Come on down. As soon as everything opens up, I'd be happy to have you come on down to the office and we'll do it live. Right on.
Sounds good, man.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much for your time. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too.